I'm Annie. I'm one of Rohan's research assistants, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Heather Krause. Heather is the founder of We All Count, a project for equity in data, working with teams across the globe to embed a lens of ethics into their data products, from funding to data collection to statistical analysis and algorithmic accountability. She is a statistician with decades of global experience working on complex data problems and has worked with a range of clients from MasterCard and Volkswagen to the United Nations, the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Secretariat, Airbnb, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is also on the data advisory board of the UNHCR. The reason that I am introducing Heather today is because for most of my undergraduate career, I've actually lived with Heather's son. So most of what I know about Heather actually has very little to do with how accomplished she is as a data scientist. I know her mainly as the person who frantically shipped a random assortment of groceries and PPE to my house on a weekly basis for the first few months of the pandemic. And she is also the person raising probably the most spoiled dog that I've ever met, who is a French bulldog named Bubba. Maybe he will make an appearance if we're lucky. So it was very much to my surprise when her name came up in a conversation I was having with Rohan earlier this year. And I found out that she is apparently rather well known and good at what she does, which I think you can tell from the bio and list of accomplishments that I just read off. So with that being said, I'm very, very excited that Heather is speaking at the Toronto Data Workshop today, and I'll pass it over to her for her talk on equity in data, or how not to accidentally use data like a racist, sexist, colonialist, etc.
Thank you so much, Annie. That is, I can confirm, all true. A little bit of a pandemic panic and a very spoiled dog. And I'll share that one of the reasons I'm here is because Annie asked me last summer to help her choose a statistics class to take at the University of Toronto and as part of her degree. And when I looked through some of her options, and looked at some of the professors, I found Rohan's website and said, oh, take everything that this person is teaching. This is your person. Take everything that he's teaching. And oh, look, he has this cool club in the afternoons. Let's try and go to that. And so I'm a big fan of this group of people and was thrilled to be asked if I could come for a little while and talk. And essentially, I'm a mathematical statistician and own two data science consulting companies. And I love data, like I assume everybody else. We have a data club, so we're all in this boat together. And I very, very much at a young age got into using data because I saw it as a way to help us understand how to use data to achieve kind of mission-driven goals or social good that could cut through a lot of the like prejudice, racism, sexism, all the various human prejudice and bias. Quantitative data is the solution. And so I have a lot of fancy degrees and a lot of training and how to use the tools and do statistical analysis. And I leaped excitedly out of grad school and learned pretty much right away that data is in fact not the silver bullet I had hoped. And the place that really, really taught me this was living and working in rural Bangladesh, where I was working as a freelance statistician to help various groups of people understand how data was working or wasn't working in their programs. And one of the groups of women I was fortunate enough to work with were these women here who were trying to understand how to get more milk out of the cows that they owned. And we collected data using stickers, using pictures, using all kinds of things that were appropriate for the context we were in. And being just out of grad school, it blew my mind to realize kind of what I had been taught was quote unquote kind of messy data, maybe unstructured data or like an Excel sheet or a database that hadn't really been cleaned and audited. Was nothing like what actual data was. And that by the time data gets into anything that's machine readable, it's already been through so many processes and so many people's opinions of what counts and what should be counted, that I realized that my education had taught me some useful technical skills, but had not taught me to think carefully about how values and worldviews were being embedded in those technical skills. And my education, I've been around for a long time now. I'm probably one of the oldest people at this club. And my education isn't, unfortunately, different than most people's. And with the rise of kind of data, evidence-based this and that, medicine, policy, everything else, education for sure, one of the problems with the rise in the use of quantitative evidence is that we have a very severe equity problem, that people are making very prejudiced choices, but they don't know it because they are kind of buying this idea, this myth that's perpetuated that data, quantitative data in particular, is value neutral. And most of the people that I work with are not using data like in the fake news sense or to intentionally double down on racism and stuff like that. Most people that I work with, whether they're the head of a state or somebody running a tiny, tiny little nonprofit helping pregnant teenagers to read, they want to use data to get to the truth, to pierce through the bias and prejudice and human error. Unfortunately, that is just not the way it works, and that even the most basic mathematics has a worldview embedded in it. And the story that my favorite story about how even basic mathematics has a worldview embedded in it is this one. We have a school. This school has 3 classrooms. Classroom A has 3 students. Classroom B has 6 students, and classroom C has 9 students. We're researchers. We want to know, what's the average classroom size? What's the average number of students across these 3 classrooms? There's an obvious answer, which most people get, which is the average classroom size here is 6 students in this school. That is a correct answer. However, there is another correct answer, and that is 7 students per classroom is the average student. The math is the same, but these 2 answers reflect a different lived experience. Now, if some of you are feeling angry or enraged or confused right now, I have a much longer YouTube video I can share at a later date, and I'm happy to have long, intense conversations with you about this because it's really important. But essentially, if we want to embed the lived experience of the teachers in the way that we take the classroom, we go to the first classroom, we ask that teacher, how many students are in your classroom? That teacher says there's 3. Then we go to the classroom B. That teacher says there's 6 students in my classroom. We go to classroom C. That teacher says there's 9. We add them up. We get 18 students. We divide that 18. We use the denominator of the number of perspectives and we get 6. That is the answer that most people believe is, quote unquote, like the objective truth. However, if we're doing education research, we might want to center the lived experience of students. And to do this, we would calculate this average in a different way. We would go to the first classroom and say to the first student in classroom A, how many students in your classroom? That student would look around and say 3. Second student in classroom A also correctly looks around and says, including myself, there's 3 students in my classroom. Same thing with the third student in classroom A. Now, you don't actually have to ask these students. You can just look at the data set you have, but for illustrative purposes, it's nice to consider that we're asking the students just to get the idea of how this embeds somebody's lived experience. We go to classroom B and we ask the first student in classroom B, how many in your classroom? That student correctly looks around. It says there's 6, including myself. Then all of the other students in classroom B also say there's 6. And then all of the students in classroom C correctly look around and say there's 9 students. We do the math in the same way. We add it all up. We get 126. We divide that. We use the denominator of the number of perspectives we have, and we get that the average classroom size is 7. Now, I know that this is a very advanced group. I talk to a lot of different kinds of people, and I know you're a really advanced group, and you're probably thinking, yes, Heather, but the second answer, that 7, is a weighted average. That's not a simple average, that's a weighted average. And according to what you've all been taught, probably in the conventional education system, you would be correct. But that begs the question, weighted by what? Weighted by somebody's values. weighted by somebody's world view. So yes, all averages are weighted averages. So the idea that we have something called a simple average and something called a weighted average, the simple average means that the dominant worldview is so deeply embedded that we don't even count it as a worldview anymore. And that right there is the problem with this idea that statistics and research and quantitative evidence is value free. What they really mean is that the dominant worldview has been so deeply embedded in the way that we do this that we forget that it's even an opinion. And once you realize this, this is everywhere. This isn't like a fancy party trick about this average classroom size. It is in every single aspect of the way that we think about data, use data, analyze data, and interpret data. I'm going to use another real example that is from a government that we were working with that was trying to kind of do some poverty reduction work, and they wanted to say, is our project a success? So we helped them collect data, and we showed that, sorry, having some trouble with the screen. Okay, we collected data and helped them answer the question, is the project a success? We collected data. Before the project, the average in this community was about $800 a month of average income. After the project, about $1,300. This chart definitely seems like the project was a success. However, there are 3 very distinct zip codes that exist within this community. And if we use the same data to find out what was the experience like in each of these zip codes, we see that the project was kind of a success if you're in that dark purple color zip code number 1. But the project wasn't a success at all if you're in this light blue zip code, this bottom zip code number 3. So was the project a success? Kind of, for some people. And there's a third way that we can use this data. Same data, same project, and that is looking at the income inequality gap in this community at the beginning and at the end of this project. And at the beginning of this project, the income inequality gap is $200. And you can see by the end of the project, the income inequality gap is much, much larger. So is our project a success? Same data, all math is correct here. It really depends on who gets to decide or define what counts as a success. This is very, very much a math problem, and it's very, very much a human problem, because part of the reason that people are starting to lose trust in science and in evidence is that, just like the people in that blue zip code, they see themselves contributing data and having that data used to feed them back results or evidence that doesn't reflect their lived experiences. So this is a very important problem, technically, mathematically, and on the human level. I don't know what's wrong with it. Most of traditional kind of data science education, whether it's formal or informal, picked up along the way, is this idea that, okay, the point of kind of power in data science is to get to figure out what question we're going to ask. And the question gets asked, and then we have objective data, objective analysis, objective results that lead us to an objective decision. You folks are a lot of practitioners in data, so you probably already know that this is what data science actually looks like. Dozens and dozens and dozens of choices, small choices and big choices all along the way. And each one of those choices is the place in which you embed an opinion, you embed a worldview, or you center a lived experience into your work. And once you realize that, you have to make these choices. It is not possible. People come to me all the time and say, can you please help us make an objective, bulletproof piece of research? And I say, no, it isn't possible to create a value-free, completely unbiased piece of research. You have to make these choices, and there is no right choice. The responsibility to use data with equity is about understanding that we're making these choices and doing our best to make these choices to align with our equity goals, to center in every choice the lived experience that we're trying to center, and be transparent about it. Every single choice you make reflects a worldview, and the more we can get transparent about those choices, the more trustworthy and equitable anything we do with data is going to be. And excuse me. I'm going to give you one more example, and that's some work that we're doing with a network of food banks in the United States. They're in very high demand during COVID, and they are doing some customer satisfaction work. And they're doing a survey. Large number of respondents to this survey are self-identifying as white. Medium number of respondents to this survey are self-identifying as Black. And a very small number of respondents to this survey are self-identifying as American Indian. And this is really, really common when we try and break out data by any kind of social identity. And kind of the convention that we see a lot of researchers, scientists, government officials do is publish reports from surveys like this, where they say something along the lines of the American Indian results are not statistically significant. And the amazing epidemiologist, Abigail Echohawk, Pawnee, head of the Seattle Public Health, has called this a data genocide, that calling a significant is very problematic. And there's other kind of equivalent words like did not reach the reliability threshold, things like that. So a couple of things about this. First thing about this is there is no statistical test for the statistical significance of a sample size. Now, again, we offline and fight about that for as long as you'd like. But there are no tests for the statistical significance of a sample size. And so rather than saying not statistically significant, which A is technically incorrect, and B puts the onus for the lack of a result on the size of a population, and most very small populations, whether it's sexual orientation, gender, religion, language, race, are usually small because of oppression. Instead of saying that, we need to take it upon ourselves to find a way to express the uncertainty. We don't want to give people results that are going to be misinterpreted or that can be used to make decisions because people don't understand the plus or minus or the over under or the range or the confidence interval, however you want to talk about it. It's our job to say, for example, in this case, we can't provide you with results of the customer satisfaction level of our American Indian clients because our results are too uncertain. See how that puts the locus of power on us as the researchers, rather than the American Indian results are statistically insignificant or do not reach the level of certainty, a statistical threshold. We, the researchers, did not design a project that was going to produce meaningful, certain results for American Indian clients. It takes that implicit idea that this is this small populations issue to this is our issue. This is a research issue. We either need to find a better way to talk about this or design a better survey. So in order to deal with the years and years of frustration and angst that I have been feeling around this, over the last couple of years, myself and the team at We All Count has developed and tested something that we call the Data Equity Framework. And I could talk to you for 8 hours about the Data Equity Framework, but essentially it is a framework that is designed to help anybody that's either creating data or making decisions on data or doing analysis, help them understand where are those choices being made in the generation of research and evidence, and are the choices that we are making in alignment with our goals, and if so, great. And if not, how can we tweak them? And these 7 steps: funding, motivation, project design, data collection, analysis, interpretation, and communication. We've tested it in a lot of sectors, from kind of big corporations to tiny little nonprofits to, as Annie mentioned, the United Nations, a couple of universities. And we're pretty sure that these 7 steps exist everywhere. Now, they're not called the same things, and they don't carry the equivalent importance everywhere. But we find that it's a pretty reliable, grounded, strategic framework for kind of thinking through where you could improve the equity in the work that you're doing. And we often talk about them in an order that kind of relates to the life cycle of many research projects, but this is not a new dogma. This is not a new recipe that everybody has to follow. You can do them in any order, and you can use some of the tools, you can use none of the tools. You can take the ideas and create tools of your own. This is not a prescription for how things have to be done. This is a system of checklists and tools and processes for thinking about the choices that we as scientists are making and seeing if those choices can be strengthened. I am not, in this amount of time, going to actually do very much talking about the individual steps, but I am just going to say 1 or 2 sentences about each step, just to give you an idea of what the heck am I talking about, because it can seem very abstract, very theoretical, but in fact, it's very, very grounded. Most of the time, we're working on the ground with practitioners. So funding is the first step. You know all about funding. Whoever has control of the money actually gets to decide some really important things, like what even gets to count as data and what research questions get answered. We have a really, really practical funding web tool, which I can share you folks by email after, but it's a digital tool that helps you understand kind of the web of power that underlies your research project and make corrections. Motivation is the second step. Now, motivation is about the purpose. Why are you bothering to do this work? And this is the step that, of all the projects that I see fail or end in heartbreak, it's a motivation problem. It's a clarity of purpose problem. Most research has a really vague, kind of externally stated core motivation, and then a giant amount of unstated goals that are really driving most of the decisions. And since most of the decisions are where you get to decide whose lived experience gets centered, all these unstated goals lead directly to equity problems. So we have some tools and checklists that help you as an individual or as a research team or even as a table of stakeholders get much more specific about your core motivation, about why you're doing it, and in a way that doesn't leave kind of these value judgments open. Like words like improvement are very, very broad words that, as we've seen in that government income chart, can be interpreted from so many different sets of values. And then we help people get transparent about their secondary goals, which can be a little uncomfortable if you're a very, very conventional quantitative researcher and don't believe that any personal ambitions or organizational drives should be admitted to. But again, in terms of strengthening the public's trust in science, getting transparent about the secondary goals is incredibly helpful. Okay, step 3 is where we really get into the meat of what is considered by most people to be research, and that's project design. And that's where we talk about who actually gets to make the decisions about how these things get operationalized, because the operationalization is mostly where the worldviews and the lived experiences get centered. And we do a lot of work with thinking about research questions. And the 2 things that we always ask about a research question are, where is the research question putting the onus to change? And how is the research question defining success? So we do a lot of work with school districts around the world, because there are, of course, very big equity problems in education. And this school district in Texas was trying to do a couple of interventions or initiatives to improve the dropout rates among different subgroups of students. And they came to us with the research question, what are the trends in Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic male dropout rates compared to white male students, and which of our 2 interventions are working best? So, of course, assessment question number 1 of a research question, where are we putting the onus to change? This question pretty much is putting the onus to change on young men of color. And that's incredibly common, especially in the mission-driven sector. We do research that's designed to support marginalized people, and we frame the research question to expect them to change. And what's the definition of success? Here it's quite clearly the data generated by white male students. So we work with them for a little while, and we get a new research question, which says, how much are our interventions effective in removing the barriers we put up to Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic boys remaining in school in our district? So again, I love these research question because in terms of bang for your buck, this doesn't cost any money. You don't have to collect different data. You don't have to go back to whoever it is gave you a grant or funding, but it immediately takes the ship off of the marginalized people or oppressed people saying, how can we socially engineer something so we can effectively get you to change to be more like these dominant people, to how can we actually change this system? So that is one of the things that we focus on in the project design sector. I'm not going to talk too much about the data collection step because I know that gets a lot of airtime already. But one of the things I'll say is that it's very important to talk about who is constructing categories and whose definitions are used in those categories if we're going to collect demographics. I know that there's a lot of attention paid to like disaggregate the data. And I get that is place. However, disaggregating data often causes more equity problems than it solves. It's a great first step. It's a terrible place to stop. And the reason it's a terrible place to stop is the way that disaggregated data gets used or understood is often accidentally doubling down on racism or sexism. And that's because most social identity data is a proxy. So, for example, if I want to understand whether race, back to that Texas example, whether racism is causing certain students to have less good student outcomes, what I actually want to know is, how is racism impacting educational outcomes? 9 times out of 10, what a researcher will do is collect data on race and then use race as a proxy for the experience of racism. And if we unpack that a little bit, what we're doing is asking somebody to tell us the color of their skin or their race, and then making a whole bunch of assumptions about what lived experiences, opinions, values they have based on the color of their skin, which is pretty darn close to the definition of racism. So we really need to try and actually study racism or oppression or marginalization rather than just using social identities as proxies for these things. And we have a bunch of scales and surveys that can help you actually do that. Analysis, I'm not going to talk too much more about because we already talked about the classroom size. But I will say, in terms of more advanced analytics like machine learning, AI, predictive algorithms, causal inference, what we choose to include in a model makes a huge difference. If I go back to Bangladesh and all the work that we did in Bangladesh, trying so hard to embed equity in the model that we're doing, things like trying to see if our training was working and controlling for time use as a confounder, and then talking to the women, and they're saying, not in technical terms, but in very anguished human terms, that time use is not a confounder in our experience. Time use is a mediator in our experience. And the models that use time use as a confounder show that the training produces twice as much milk. Women who get involved in this training have twice as much milk from their cows. However, using that time use variable as a confounder, of course, you all know, holds it steady in a very specific mathematical way, which hides the fact that, yeah, if you do twice as much work, you're going to get twice as much product. So when we included it as a mediator, which actually reflected their lived experience, we get a very different result about the effectiveness of an initiative. And what's important here is that we can't teach students to only do this one kind of model. You can't say always use a mediator, not a confounder, because neither model is wrong. What we have to understand is every single choice we make in the technical construction of a statistical model is a value judgment. It's not an afterthought that you can kind of run some kind of, fairness assessment on and see, every single choice that you make of what to include and how, and specifically in what way and in relation to the other things you're including, has a deeply human impact. It embeds a lived experience in a model. Even the smallest changes can have huge impacts. And so Rohan and I were talking at the beginning about how we weren't too crazy about like data science education stories. Teach all this, 9/10 of what we teach is like how to build a model or whatever. And then there's this one class on like, oh yeah, right. And you could kill people. Interpretation is the 6th of the 7 steps. I'm actually going to skip this example because I want to leave more time for you all to ask questions. But essentially, the idea is interpretation can go badly wrong. We have algorithms that are deciding whether people get to leave jail or have parole, and those algorithms are being purported to say things like, this algorithm predicts how likely it is that you will reoffend. When you dig into the methods, it doesn't predict anything like that. It predicts how likely it is this person is going to be in contact with the police again, be arrested by those police, and not have money for bail. Clearly, some worldviews embedded in there beyond just how likely it is this person will reoffend. Communication distribution is the 7th step. And I will only say one thing. I know some of you here data visualization folks is a quite close one, but not always smooth. I think it's really, really critical that we ditch our kind of rules and thou shalt and thou shalt nots that exist a lot in DataViz, specifically in DataViz Twitter, and instead adapt a user-oriented system, mostly because there are no culturally universal DataViz practices. There is lots of peer-reviewed journal articles on human cognition that are applied to the DataViz world and used to justify those rules. But our team did an analysis, a meta-analysis of those. And of the top 30 most cited journal articles on that topic, only 2 of them had any respondents that were outside of Canada and the US. And of the remaining, only 3 of them had any respondents that were outside of Canada, the US, and were not enrolled in a college or university. So these DataViz best practices are for a tiny little sliver of people who've already been taught to see data in a very specific way. So not that you shouldn't use them as kind of ideas, but don't think that they are culturally universal rules that apply to humans. So those are the 7 steps that we use to kind of help individuals, teams, and organizations really harness this fact that all of data science has values embedded in it. Rather than be sad about that or not trust science, let's harness that and really create research and evidence that centers the lived experience that we're trying to center. It's actually really good news, not bad news. So I want to make sure that we leave at least a quarter of the time for questions, because I can see that there's already tons in the chat, but so I should say weallcount.com is kind of the online place that this project lives, and it really is a project. Like, I'm talking to you here as the founder, but I'm one of many, many people who are coming together as a community around this project. We have lots of opportunities for engagement and partnership if you're interested in joining the fun. And hello@weallcount.com is kind of the team email. We're a tiny little team, and so that's our kind of team email where if you reach out, whoever can help you the best and the fastest can get back to you. And I will stop sharing my screen. Yes.
Heather, I am so happy you exist, but I cannot believe you are real. This was incredible. Like, So good. Thank you so much for reminding us of what matters. And I'm so happy we have so many people here today because I feel like I'm going to be rewatching this every couple months to as a refresher, you know? So we're going to record the first two questions that we had already prepared and shared with you. What are some books that you recommend everyone reads?
Oh my goodness. That is a very, very hard question to answer because there's so many books that I would love for people to read. It really depends on what you do, but one of the book recommendations, really, I'll say weallcount.com has a resource list, and we update it regularly with books and podcasts and papers that we love. It's a tiny bit out of date right now, but I would go there. One of the books that I really like about causality, it's a little controversial, but it's Judea Pearl's book on the Book of Why, I think is very nice if you want to think about the kind of human meanings of causal analysis from a kind of technical term, but not too technical. A very, very fantastic book is Accounting for Slavery, which is a book that came out of Caitlin Rosenthal's work. I don't know if she's at Harvard or MIT, but about how so much of the techniques and tools we have now for big data were developed in the slave trade. Of course, the kind of famous ones, Weapons of Mass Destruction is a great starter one. A book that I really, really love is called White Logic, White Methods, Racism and Methodology. I really like methodology books. The kind of classic indigenous methodologies is a great book. Here, this one's so good. It's by Michelle Fine. Just Researching Contentious Times is by Michelle Fine. That's a less technical book. That's not going to be too helpful in terms of statistics, but it's a great book as well. The Causal Analysis Mixtape is also quite good.
I think we're all set for our summer reading. Like, this is maybe a few years of reading. This is excellent. Thank you so much. Our other question was, how do we convince the type of people that didn't come today that these things are super important and that they have to be thought about from day one?
Yeah, so thank you. I love this question, and because I have to deal with this quite a lot. And I deal with this in several ways. There are a lot of people who do not care about equity, and that is their right, I guess. It's not a strategic or tactical point to try and debate that. So there's two things. First is that if you just take the average classroom size example, and the fact that there are two correct answers to that, if you haven't embedded equity in whose worldview you're centering, means that if you aren't carefully using these tools, the answer that you're getting in your very expensive, very important research are incorrect. So if you don't care about equity, but you want accurate, reliable, repeatable answers that you can actually make business or policy or medical decisions on, you need to start thinking about this. So it doesn't matter if you don't care about equity. If you want to use data to get results that you're not going to get fired over, you need to start thinking about what value systems have been embedded into those and how, so that's number one. Number two is similar to that, which is this is coming. So 25 years ago, ExxonMobil could dump anything it wanted into our rivers, our streams, our oceans. And as long as the returns were coming in, shareholders didn't care, investors didn't care. Now, every single company that is worth its stock prices in its annual general report has an environmental impact statement, has a sustainability statement. And just in the last 2 weeks, the shareholders themselves have started to pass legislation with real teeth in it that are requiring big polluting companies to start changing their ways. So like 30 years ago, everyone would have been like, yeah, what about all the people that really don't care about climate change and just care about money? Same thing with data equity, but we're getting there much faster, which is a silver lining brought to us by Donald Trump Mark Zuckerberg and Cambridge Analytica. The sheen of, oh, this is all so great is wearing off. And people are like, holy shit, like this stuff could really hurt us. In fact, this stuff could kill people and destroy our way of life. And so the trajectory of civic requirement and even stakeholder requirement of statements about equity, I mean, they're much, much closer than 25 years away. That every annual general report, even corporate ones for companies that, you know, don't make any claims towards equity. If you're a company that makes claims towards equity, then immediately you need to start doing this. And then thirdly, it's so much easier, it's so much cheaper, and it's so much faster to do this work proactively. And you're going to have to do this work. So it depends on, like, why do you want to see your name and your company's name or your university's name or your nonprofit's name on the front page of the Toronto Star? Is it because you're the best practices in doing this? Or is it because one grad student did some analysis on your work and found out that you're using data in an incredibly racist way? So choice is yours. But like all things, you're going to have to make a choice. So the things that I say to people who are like, well, I don't really care about equity, or we don't have enough money right now. I'm like, well, you don't have enough money to clean it up later is what you really don't have.
I think that's first genius and also somehow almost common sense, but we know that it isn't, right? It's like you'd hope that it would be, but it isn't quite yet. So we're hopefully moving towards that direction. And maybe we can stop recording now. I have another question, and I saw that